John Pienaar at Drive. Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
It's 6 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar. Welcome to Pienaar and Friends. Tonight, that is the political strategist Joe Tanner and the chief political commentator of the I paper, Kitty Donaldson. We've got a lot to talk about. Danny Kruger's defection, Keir Starmer's future, assuming he has a future. We're going to be looking ahead to the arrival of Donald Trump on these shores tomorrow. I want to hear from you. What are you thinking? Send me a text, send me a tweet, and let's chat after the news with Laura Cook.
Thank you. Good evening. Sir Keir Starmer has acknowledged he knew the Foreign Office were investigating claims about Lord Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein when he offered his full backing to the ambassador in the Commons. The Prime Minister said he had known of the association but insists he had sacked the peer last week because the relationship turned out to be far different to what he had understood. He says a proper due diligence process was followed before the appointment.
Had I known then what I know now, I'd have never appointed him, because what emerged last week were emails, Bloomberg emails, which showed that the nature and extent of the relationship that Peter Mandelson had with Epstein was far different to what I had understood to be the position when I appointed him.
Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, has granted an emergency debate tomorrow. The debate will be on the appointment process and the circumstances leading to the dismissal of the former UK ambassador. One of Sir Keir Starmer's most senior aides, meanwhile, Paul Obendon, has resigned. The Prime Minister's Director of Strategy, who worked in Morgan McSweeney's team, said he was leaving Downing Street over an inappropriate conversation he had with colleagues while working as a Labour press officer in 2017. The comments were of a sexual nature regarding MP Diane Abbott. It adds further pressure to the Prime Minister as he faces continuing questions over his judgment in the Mandelson scandal and Angela Rayner's departure. But elsewhere, the Prime Minister has condemned Elon Musk's comments during a speech at the Unite the Kingdom rally in London at the weekend as dangerous. The billionaire owner of X suggested that free speech was being eradicated in the UK and violence is coming to you, urging people to fight back or die. Sir Keir Starmer claims the language used threatened violence and intimidation on our streets. Meanwhile, 8 people have been charged after the protests in London. 150,000 attended the Unite the Kingdom rally, with 5,000 at an anti-racism counter-protest. Danny Kruger has become the only sitting Conservative MP to have left the party since the Tories' defeat in the last election, as he announced his defection to Reform UK. The East Wiltshire MP and Shadow Minister made his reasons clear.
The Conservative Party is over. Over as a national party. Over as the principal opposition to the left. But I'm not despondent, because Conservatism is not over. It's never been needed more, and actually it's never been more vibrant, because the failure of the Conservative Party has created space for an alternative.
Anne Widdecombe, Reform UK's immigration and justice spokesperson, explains what he'll bring.
What I think he is there to do is to enact the principles which used to guide the Conservative Party and which haven't now for some time, and translate that into reform. I mean, if you think of what reform stands for in terms of sovereignty, controlling our own borders, lowering taxes, etc., you are actually exhibiting in that some of the strongest characteristics of the Thatcher years.
Aristocrat Constance Martin and her partner Mark Gordon have each been jailed for 14 years for killing their newborn baby while on the run. Gordon also received a 4-year period on extended licence. Both were previously found guilty of gross negligence manslaughter, child cruelty, concealing the birth of a child and perverting the course of justice following 2 trials. The government says the new nuclear deal between the UK and US will see a boost in jobs and economic growth. It'll be finalised during Donald Trump's state visit this week and will turbocharge the building of nuclear power stations. The Hartlepool plant is set to be replaced, which British gas owner Centrica says will create 2,500 construction jobs. The company's CEO, Chris O'Shea, says he's excited about rolling out the advanced modular reactor technology.
The UK built a plant using this technology. I think endorsed it in the 1960s, turned it off in the 1970s. So this is the culmination of more than 60 years of testing and planning. So this is not a new technology, but it will be the first time this type of technology has been deployed in the last 50 years.
And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive with Barclays Corporate Banking.
It is good to have you with us here on Pienaar and Friends, an hour of good conversation in very good company, which tonight is the political strategist Joe Tanner. Good to see you, Joe.
Hello.
Always good to see you. And we're joined by Kitty Donaldson, chief political commentator at the Eye. Hello, Kitty.
Hello.
Hi. Joe, what's your thought for the day?
So, John, my thought for the day was actually sparked by this morning when I was listening to the show presented by Kate McCann and Stig Abel over breakfast. And I listened to Jackie Smith. So she is the government's Women and Equalities lead, and she's also been the Skills Minister. She's Baroness Jackie Smith, who I have long admired, had a great sort of... she went out of politics and went into to handle... to run a podcast. She had a really good broadcasting career and then went back into government when Keir Starmer was elected Prime Minister. And it was a really difficult interview this morning. And what was odd was there's this thing at the moment which I've sort of found fascinating. It's the sort of question that I've started to wonder is the sort of art of spin dead now? And are we actually into an era where the public are sort of demanding just more straight answers? And what happened was Jackie was asked about the issue of how many people were we going to take from France and how many we were going to send to France on this one in, one out deal that was starting. And she just didn't want to get into it. She apparently didn't even want to talk about the details. And this is a former Home Secretary, which is sort of a difficult one. You know, this is on the agenda. And then proceeded to try and divert the whole interview to talking about some nuclear deal that was being announced, which is not her brief for a start, completely irrelevant to both of the areas that she was looking after. And then sort of it got into a fairly bad-tempered spat with Kate, which isn't sort of, you know, the norm, but it does happen more and more where ministers get sort of really frustrated because there's difficult questions to answer. But it got to the point of sort of trying to talk over. And I think there has become a bit of an art form now of politicians also trying to talk over presenters. And some will argue that maybe presenters do it too, and that, you know, often it's just question. But it just struck me that part of the reason that the public are just so fed up, they're fed up with politics, they're fed up with politicians, is because they feel there isn't a straight answer to anything. And it's sort of interesting that with someone like Tim Allen going back into to government, who was around for that sort of, I suppose we'd call it the birth of spin in a way, if you look at the Blair government, it just made me wonder if we're sort of, are we going to enter a period where, you know, part of Nigel Farage's sort of appeal has been this fact that he'll sit on a programme and say, I don't know the answer, but what I do know is this, or what I think is this, and we'll come up with something completely random. We'll even answer a question where his policy doesn't quite add up, but the public almost respect him for being more honest, even when it's because he's being honest that he doesn't know something. So it just struck me that, is this going to be something the public, when they're sort of getting more agitated about their distrust and their frustration, is it all part of the mix that actually government and some politicians on other party benches are not helping themselves in terms of gaining that trust back with the public?
I've got to say, Joe, I do think you speak for Britain when you talk about people's impatience with political guests on programmes being interviewed refusing to answer the question. I'd also, though, add there is nothing new about that. That has been the case for as long as you can remember, and long before that. And nor did spin start with the Blair government, although so much of that is laid at the door of Alistair Campbell. I think Gladstone had a spin doctor, and that's quite a long time ago.
But did we identify it more, though? Did we feel that it was much more of an art form with Blair, that perhaps it felt like it was born then? Because it feels like that was when we talked about it more.
The phrase spin doctor certainly came out at that time, didn't it?
Yeah,
but you've got to cross the Atlantic. Spin doctor is a phrase, I think. But I mean, you're right, but what maybe has developed rather than changed is that more people are more aware of all of that. And then there's the execution of obfuscating and twisting and turning and changing these subjects. There are some questions, and we do it. There are some questions we know, but if they're answered, if there's any kind of answer, you think in your mind, got them. You know, they've gone for that one. They have taken the bait. And the example of how many migrants can you take from France as and when the one in, one out deal takes place. If a minister answers that very directly, then it puts a limit on the exercise. It puts a limit on the policy, and the deterrent effect will be lost. And they have got a particular issue, I think, which is maybe as much or more about expanding the programme, because it cannot be a deterrent when you've got 100 people coming to this country as part of a one-in-one-out deal. It's got to be much bigger than that, and it's not clear that France is in the business of doing
that. And isn't the point, though, that if you've heralded something as being so amazing and it's going to work and it's going to do all these things in the first place, if the spin was around the announcement, then actually the point is you've set yourself up then that all your answers are going to fall short.
Yeah.
And so there is a degree of sort of expectation management that some of the problems the government then have are because of their own making.
And
because
that's a
they did it
product.
with the India deal, didn't they? They made the big thing about the India deal, and then when everyone worked out there was this issue about visas and people and when they could stay and for how much longer, no one really understood it. It didn't appear to have been briefed properly, and of course then it sort of fell apart and took the edge off the India deal. So it's
I'll tell you the one that really winds me up is when they come on a radio show like this or the TV and they say, I'm not aware of that story. And you're like,
Yes.
Where have you been?
Also, can you read? Because it's in the paper.
Yeah, or possibly on the front of every newspaper.
Yeah, exactly.
At the top of every bulletin. But they're not aware of that.
But is it more that I do wonder if maybe it is because of things like social media that we see maybe the clips of the what we call maybe a lesser good, a worse performance or a subpar performance, you can then, or because we see several clips from across, say, a morning round, that then you can actually piece together a different story, or you can judge people differently. And perhaps when we just listened to the wireless and we just heard one show in the morning and that was it, you couldn't quite make those comparisons in the same way. And maybe it's part of the age that we're living in, that actually the fact that someone's going to be asked multiple questions and maybe there'll be inconsistencies or the way they handle the question is not as good. It just, I don't know, for some reason this morning I was sort of in the middle of putting my makeup on and listening to it all, and I just thought, well, this is not going well. This isn't going to get better. And I would argue that this is across all political parties have this challenge, but it just seems to be very acute for the government when you've got a narrative you're trying to push, and maybe it is partly the age we're living in that it's just more obvious now.
Well, I think it's a product. One of the products of the age of hyperspin, that governments and government ministers were then briefed to go out and sell a particular story. It's about getting through the round. It's about getting through that round of interviews in the morning, or maybe just
ideally
through the day.
making no news whatsoever.
Well, but if they are trying to make news, they make an announcement or make some grand pronouncement, which might never have been made the following day. And if you go back to it, 3 weeks, whatever happened to that initiative, well, it's almost as if it's been forgotten. I mean, I can recall. I don't say this is a particular uniquely Labour phenomenon, because it isn't, but I can remember the last Labour lot making announcements about major campaigns being started. Great, and it made bulletins, it made papers, and the campaign amounted to one van going around with one poster, doing one circuit of Parliament Square, and that was it, a grand national campaign. But it kept the machine, it was grist to the machine, and it kept on.
And actually, when you look at what happened in the summer with Nigel Farage doing his press conferences on a Monday and actually getting the agenda, he made himself very available, would in some respects actually limit some of the access to being sort of a big press conference where it was all done, and then didn't necessarily tour all the stations, but sort of just did something as an event and sort of had it a bit contained. I don't know if that's
but did take questions on every subject.
All sorts, yeah.
Kitty, what's your thought for the day?
Well, I hope you don't mind a very blatant plug for my column, which has just dropped on our website at the iPaper. I've been looking today at the race to succeed Keir Starmer, which sounds a bit, what's the word, previous.
Are you announcing your candidacy in your column?
Yeah. I need to see though first, Joe, I'm afraid. And what I've been hearing is that everyone's talking about this seat up in Greater Manchester, Gorton and Denton, which is currently held by the suspended Labour MP Andrew Gwynn. And most people in Westminster and the Labour Party expect him to retire from the House of Commons and there to be a by-election. Now, we don't quite know when this by-election will be, but it's being held up as the seat that Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, would take.
That's a credible theory? Are you hearing anything of that?
Yes, yep. And because there's several reasons for this. One is Andy Burnham, who sort of made his brand out of being kind of, professional Mancunian, he couldn't really do a chicken run to Hertfordshire or somewhere and stand, even if there was a vacancy, he's got to stand somewhere in Manchester. There are no other vacancies coming up in the area, at least not in the sort of foreseeable. So people are suggesting that he should stand there. What Number 10 does about this is the sort of next question. Keir Starmer could let it be known to the Labour's National Executive Committee that he's not in favour. He could, that point could be made, and they could. There are enough loyalists on the NEC to block Burnham being selected for the seat. But that's very dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
Yeah, exactly. And what that means is so what do you do with a problem like Andy, right? Do you sort of hug him close and let him stand, even though people are already gathering around him to say, well, this guy's the great hope, and he could take over from Starmer because Starmer's in so much trouble? Or do you block him from standing? Now, blocking from standing is not really an option, I don't think. So what I've been hearing today is this idea of a deal or some sort of pact between Burnham and Starmer, that Starmer would let Burnham stand in this by-election whenever it happens, in exchange for some sort of pledge not to stand against Starmer before the next general election, to let him go into the election, and then if there were a leadership challenge. Now, this is, of course, incredibly hypothetical.
Yes.
And also, there's no love lost between these two people.
No.
You know, so the idea of any pact standing is sort of quite fanciful. But I just thought it was a fascinating idea that people are already discussing this as a possibility. You know, even a week ago, we weren't talking about, Starmer's successor, and now things have kind of taken on hyperspeed, and we're talking about, which bit of the jigsaw goes into which place and how Andy Burnham gets into Parliament, basically.
Do you give a lot of house room to that really interesting theory of a new, I don't know what curry house they go to formalise it, some new Granita pact somewhere, where Starmer is acknowledging he's so desperate and insecure in his position that he wants an assurance from Andy Burnham that he's not going to run against him before the election, for whatever that assurance might mean, which, as far as I can see, is very little.
Yeah, I mean, it probably wouldn't be worth the napkin it was written on, would it? No. It's just, I think it's an interesting idea that people are talking around the subject. Sure. And this was, I'm quoting several Labour sources in my piece, but that people are now starting to game plan, war game what happens next after Starmer. Whereas I think things sort of shifted Wednesday, Thursday of last week. Before that point, people were sort of being rude about Morgan McSweeney, number 10 Chief of Staff. They weren't as directly blaming Keir Starmer, but things have significantly moved on since then. It's
a juicy little rumour, Kitty. Thank you for sharing that one with us. In fact, in the same way, we're going to carry on in a minute talking about the future of the Prime Minister Keir Starmer as leader of his party and leader of our country, to the extent that he has any kind of secure future or not. Let's get our thoughts out about that, and let's hear what you're thinking listening to this. I mean, send us that text. Join in 87222. Start with the word Times. A tweet to @Times Radio, or a voice note on WhatsApp on 0333 003 2353. Join in your own voice, in person, as it were. We've got a lot to talk about here on Pienaar and Friends with Barclays Corporate Banking. See you tomorrow clearly with Big Picture Banking from Barclays.
With Barclays Corporate Banking. Realise your business ambitions with Big Picture Banking from Barclays. Find out more at barclayscorporate.com/the-times.
I'm John Pienaar. This is Pienaar and Friends. Joe Tanner is here and Kitty Donaldson. We've been so absorbed talking about the crises surrounding the Prime Minister that we can't talk any more about that, because I want to get more in. There's never enough time in this hour to cover half the things I want to talk about, and I do want to and have to talk about the defection of Danny Kruger from the Tory party to Reform. It was all announced at a Reform News conference at Westminster this morning.
The Conservative Party is over. Over as a national party. Over as the principal opposition to the left. But I'm not despondent, because conservatism is not over. It's never been needed more, and actually it's never been more vibrant, because the failure of the Conservative Party has created space for an alternative.
And Nigel Farage, he has given Danny Kruger the job of helping to prepare the party for government.
Whether it is the parrot in the Monty Python sketch, I don't know. What I do know is this Conservative Party has zero chance of winning the next general election. Literally zero chance. But Reform genuinely does. And we've led, as I said earlier, for over 100 opinion polls.
And what about Kemi Badenoch? Well, she said she was just getting on with the job.
Danny has made his case very clear. This is not about me. I can't be distracted by that, and I'm not going to get blown off course by these sorts of incidents. I know that this is the sort of thing that is going to happen while a party is changing. I am making sure that people understand what Conservative values are.
That's Kemi Badenoch. When I spoke earlier to the former Tory Cabinet Minister Simon Clarke, he had this to say.
There's no point dressing this up as anything other than a loss, because it really is. But I disagree with his decision, and I think there are all sorts of reasons to be frustrated about the direction of the country at the moment, and there are lots of reasons why we need to rebuild the Conservative Party, and the centre-right needs to, make a full recovery. I don't think jumping to Reform, which in many ways is fundamentally not a Conservative Party, is the answer.
Well, Simon Clarke, was the Tory Party dead?
We've been around for over 300 years, so people writing us off tend to be somewhat premature in their obituaries. I mean, clearly there is an awful lot of work to be done. Nobody is denying that, least of all Kemi herself, and indeed least of all me. We need to rebuild our credibility on a whole range of issues and set out interesting and fresh policies, ready for the next general election. But do I think that Reform have a genuinely convincing alternative of their own? No, I don't. I think their plans, insofar as they have ever set them out, are built on sand. And whilst Danny is a clever and very capable man, he can't turn what is a fundamentally incoherent offer into a programme for government. I don't think anyone could.
That's Simon Clarke talking to me a little bit earlier on. Kitty Donaldson, the defection of Danny Kruger, how big a deal for you?
That's a really interesting question. We were sort of laying bets in the office. Everyone was watching the TV going, oh, is it Jacob Rees-Mogg? Is it some sort of, I don't know, fairground attraction? Who is it? And Kruger, I think, was sort of a surprise, but also not really a surprise at the same time, because he's long been unhappy with his position in the Tory party. He's very much on the right of the Tories, or wasn't very much on the right of the Tories, and so I think it's a sort of natural progression from him. He's been on a bit of a journey, actually. He was an advisor to David Cameron, wrote the Hug a Hoodie speech back in the day. And I think like Simon Clarke is right. Like, the Tories have lost a powerhouse thinker in a much more significant way than they had by losing someone like Nadine Dorries.
You do rate him in that way. You think he's
I do think he's an intellect
thinker in the party.
I think he's out of step with quite a lot of modern British political thinking, and he's got a very religious bent to all his thought processes. However, I do think he's strategic in his thinking and is very clever, and therefore will be an asset to them. But he's been tasked by Nigel Farage of being the one to sort of find the kind of experts to fill posts in government if Reform UK win, which is quite a weird sort of thing to do, because you're basically trying to find a bunch of people who will replace the people who stand as MPs. Say Farage, for the sake of a thought experiment, did win the next election, and his MPs are not going to rebel immediately when he says, actually, here's the boss of this business. They're going to be like leading the business department. I don't see how you keep party discipline together if you say thanks very much for all your efforts during the campaign, thanks for standing, thanks for pounding the streets and delivering leaflets, but by the way, I've hired the CEO of widgets.com to come in and do the job instead.
Yes, and their policy thinking and policy platform is surely it's going to need to be bottomed out and copper bottomed before the election, and well before the election. When you look at the distance they've got to cover now, which is considerable in putting together well, actually answers that stack up in facing the problems they say they want to solve.
Yeah, and their fiscal plans are all over the place at the moment, reform, which is where I think actually Kemi Badenoch does have a point. There is no point talking about a manifesto and spending plans, this far out from an election. And Farage keeps trying to sort of spin that the election will come any second now because the Labour Party is in so much disarray. I just don't see that myself. But I do think Kemi Badenoch's slightly abrasive style, saying, you're either with me or against me. If you don't like it, you can leave, has led to quite.
So she's opening the door for people.
Yeah,
holding it open for them.
Yeah, exactly. Off you go. I do think that perhaps a slightly more, mollifying tone might help a little.
Yeah, Joe, what are you thinking?
I mean, reform couldn't agree when they could all fit in a phone box. So, the idea that they get bigger and they have these people that are even bigger thinkers and, have got more experience. I thought it was interesting, the comments that were made at the reform conference about vaccinations, for example, just after you'd given Nadine Dorries a sort of, open arms to come into the party when she's a former health minister, and also, an architect on tech policy that then Reform have had some quite strong views about. So the problem is Reform to me seem like a lot of individuals that are part of, they're under a banner, but they're all quite outspoken and quite independent thinkers on their own. And Danny Kruger, I've got no particular beef with. I've not really had a huge amount of dealings with him, but he's did almost start to become a bit of a sort of Victor Meldrew of sort of, just finding things to complain about. He obviously wasn't very happy. He's taken a very principled stance about things like assisted dying and put forward some very compelling arguments about that. But I think there is a danger that people that then get used to having a sort of a soapbox or a platform to complain and talk about what they feel, because we've had this, particularly the Tories, sort of discipline's been pretty much non-existent for so long, that becomes incredibly hard for Nigel Farage to then instill with this group of individuals who are sort of personalities and figures in their own right, who, if they don't respect their colleagues or their leader, will become a very difficult group. I think that's where Nigel Farage's got to be super careful to not end up with this. I think I've called it before the sort of home for washed up Tories, but not just washed up Tories, but people that, only a while ago, when you look back at, I think it was 2022 when Christian Wakeford defected as an MP from Tory to Labour, then Nigel was saying that if he doesn't call a by-election, he'll be the dishonourable member for that particular constituency. And yet now he's prepared to take people who are defecting but aren't then calling a by-election. So you're already tweaking your standards, but then also you're going to have to bend to some of these figures because they're joining a party that doesn't actually have a fully fledged policy platform. So they're going to be disagreeing about stuff. As this stuff is going to evolve, they're not going to like some of the positions that are being taken. So you're joining a merry band because it's doing well in the polls, but actually there's a lot about it. You still don't know the positions it's going to be taking or the platform it's going to stand on. That's hugely dangerous. Are these people then going to defect again or just say they're going to stand as independents in the future? Because they don't really know the full banner that they're standing underneath yet. And I think that's incredibly challenging for those individuals and very hard for Nigel Farage to control in the future.
And when you look at such a limited field of Reform MPs, the few of them have had quite a few schisms already. I don't know how so few people manage so many schisms. But bringing in, he's not an orthodox conservative, Danny Kruger, but he is definitely a conservative and a right-wing one. Yeah. Might that make it harder to appeal further to the centre, to get in the Labour people who are, in the opinion polls, looking in their direction now, but to keep them?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I went to the Reform conference and two things were going on. One is the party activists, the Reform purists, saw the coming over of, they see themselves a bit like an arc, right? And at some point they're going to draw up the gangplank and say, no more Tories, thank you, we've got enough. The arc will sink under the weight of too many Tories. We will become too Tory to differentiate ourselves at the next election.
Do you want to imagine the spectacle of the Reform Party saying, we're full? If the Tory party keep on sinking in this way, that's what I mean. But if the Tories keep on sinking at the rate they are sinking, whether they actually want them in a flood or not, or in a single great longboat or not, a lot of Tories are going to be looking at what Kruger has just done. How do you say no when they knock on the door?
Well, Farage has been asked this question, and he says it's on a case-by-case basis. And so I think Reform see it as it will take you ex-Tory MP if you think you've got something to offer, some sort of practical skill. And the other thing I was picking up at the Reform conference is some of the senior sort of party strategists were saying, we hope to get a Labour defection, a Labour MP defecting, but we don't think that will happen until much closer to the election, when people start looking at the numbers in their seats.
Well, in other words, there's no sign of it happening at all at the moment. None.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
You'd have to be an absolutely, gung-ho Labour MP to jump now, wouldn't you? Well,
if you're in a seat you think you're certain to lose, you might be thinking about it.
Well, I suppose you might, but I mean, you were only elected on a Labour ticket 18 months ago. I think it probably is too soon in the cycle for I mean, however depressed you are, for you to for Labour to jump, a Labour MP to jump right now. Right. I think for a sort of, as Joe puts it, washed up Tory, what they got to lose.
Okay, Kitty, Joe, lovely to get your thoughts on that. We're going to move over the Atlantic after the news, because plenty's going on over there. In fact, what's going on over there is going to be going on over here somewhere, because Donald Trump is very close to getting on Air Force One and heading this way. This is Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio with Barclays Corporate Banking. See, tomorrow, clearly, big picture banking from Barclays. Now it's time for the news with Laura Cook.
Indispensable briefing on the latest politics, business and sports news of the day. Times Radio Drive with Barclays Corporate Banking. Expand your business horizons with big picture banking from Barclays. Find out more at barclayscorporate.com/the Times.
I'm John Pienaar. This is Pienaar and Friends with Joe Tanner and with Kitty Donaldson. And here's Kate Borsay, who takes over at 7. Hello, Kate.
Hi, John. Lots to sum up from today, whether it's the defection of Danny Kruger, the Conservative MP. No longer. He's going to be a Reform MP now. We'll be speaking to Sir Jake Berry, the former Tory chair, who also defected not that long ago to Reform. We'll be joined by Francis Elliott, the former political editor of The Times, now editor of The House magazine. He joins us in To Be Frank. It's our half an hour of UK politics. And we're going to be speaking to Patrick Hurley, the Labour MP for Southport, about what kind of trouble Keir Starmer is in. Now, Patrick Hurley's pretty moderate, so I think it will be good to get a gauge from perhaps what the majority of MPs are thinking at the moment. We've heard dissenting voices in your show and beyond on Times Radio today. We're also going to be speaking to Errol Musk, the father of Elon Musk. Elon Musk comments at the weekend at that huge march, causing consternation. They've been called irresponsible, inappropriate, disgusting, using language like either fight back or you die. And we'll be speaking to Errol about his son's comments. It's actually led Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Lib Dems, to say that the UK should sanction Elon Musk. We'll ask Errol about plenty more besides, maybe why Elon Musk is so sure that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. Whether he's upset not to be part of the state visit. We know that lots of other tech bros are going to be coming to the UK. So we'll do a little bit of that. We're going to be speaking to the writer of The Thunderer in the paper tomorrow. That's a fresh story for you. Just in light of the UK-US tech deals that are due to be announced during that state visit, there's a note of concern from our guest at about 9:45 about copyright, news organisations, journalism and how they would tie into a big tech deal. We've also got a sneak peek, John, at a story concerning council tax. That's after 8 o'clock here on the show. I can't reveal that until it happens. And here's something to get your thought on. Half of Britons, reports The Times today, lie about what they watch on TV. Surprising TV choices. We'll be discussing that with our panel today. I'd love to get yours, John. I mean, surely you must indulge in something a little bit suspect on the box.
Well, honestly, not quite sure what you mean by suspect, but I do. Perhaps a little bit base, perhaps a little bit, I don't know, a soap opera, John, maybe, yeah, okay. A reality TV show. So my kind of regular area of the TV sphere that I dive into is South Korean drama. I love South Korean drama, Japanese drama, and they never kiss, do they? Oh no, they're incredibly in South Korean drama. When it's like a romance, they are unbelievably chaste. I mean, so my daughter loves South Korean drama too. She's got a TV subscription. Especially for it. Yeah. That's how much she's into it. Yeah. And I've watched quite a bit of it. Yeah. And they do draw you in, those dramas, don't they? Whether they're series or films. No, but these aren't. These aren't. These are sort of, well, they're kind of. What's wrong with Married at First Sight? Honestly. No, I was going to say Love is Blind. They're better than that. There's a real divide in this room now, I tell you. The production values on some of the South Korean drama, the good ones, is really high. The script writing is really, really good. I like the acting. And the subtitles are maybe the biggest delight of all. I mean, well, you've got to. Later on, I'll give you a little list of things to look at, Joe. Well, please don't. If you don't love it, I'd be most surprised. And Japanese drama, and that's much more slapsticky. A lot of the female roles are pretty kick-ass as well, aren't they, John, in those South Korean dramas? There's a lot of equity there. How do you discover this stuff? Like, I wouldn't even know where to start. Netflix, probably, for you, John, was it? Yeah, a lot of Netflix. I mean, remember when South Korean drama really... Squid Games got people really into it, okay? And then people realised that there was a lot of really good film and TV production coming out of South Korea. It just suggests stuff to you after I watched Squid Games. It suggested a fair bit of crime fighting, South Korean drama. There's always a classic one about kind of a woman who falls in love with a guy who's just an average office worker, but then he turns out that he's the son of the CEO of one of the richest corporations in South America. It's like dreamy Sunday afternoon stuff. South Korea is such a hierarchical society. Yes. It's startling when you look at it, if you're not familiar with that situation where, I mean, the boss of a company, typically it's a recurring feature because it's a feature of South Korean life. The boss of a company, the chairman, everyone is addressed, by the way, by their job title. So, I'd be presenter Pienaar. And the boss and the chairman of the company would be chairman, whatever, of the various parts of our company, and so on and so on. And they are treated with astonishing deference. I mean, the senior staff see them off in their huge limo, bowing as they roll away. And if you are in any relationship, you are expected to defer to whoever's older than you, even if it's a matter of weeks. you treat them with particular respect unless you're given leave to be informal. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. I could honestly fall off my chair at this conversation.
No,
this is
we
not
were
what I
bored of you,
expected it to.
We need to have a viewing
party,
don't we? A viewing party at John's house.
Yeah,
we'll get some
anytime
South Korean food in.
The other one is sci-fi. I do like a good sci-fi thing. I mean Earth, the Alien Earth series is pretty good, and that's on at the moment.
Well, I think Love is Blind, Married at First Sight.
I mean, it probably
Australia,
shows my
UK.
algorithm that I was single for a while and online dating, and therefore it probably brought up all sorts of...
I'm going to give you some tips later on. I'm going to give you some tips. Anyway, Kate...
I just don't know how you scroll through Instagram at the same time as watching TV if you've got to read all those subtitles, you know?
You've got to multitask, Kitty. That's what you've got to do. Anyway, Kate, looking forward to your show in 20 minutes' time. Now... So we're going to be catching up with what's going on in the United States, or that President Trump arriving here tomorrow. And we can talk now, I think, to George Grills, the US correspondent for The Times in Washington. Hi to you, George.
Good afternoon.
Great to have you here, George. Look, I've got to ask you, what's your sort of secret TV habit? Have you got a particular corner of the TV world that you dive into?
I was watching Yellowstone recently, and I gave up, actually. I thought it was a bit hammy, if I'm honest, even though it's got these kind of alluring landscapes that are amazing of the American West. But I thought it was a bit cliched, so I've given up on that. I'm watching Girls at the moment, which I never watched originally, the kind of New York series. Would recommend. Very
okay, now we've given our listeners all sorts of recommendations. Now we better talk a bit about politics, shall we, George? Let's start with President Trump, who's on his way here tomorrow to the UK. We're talking about our expectations of that meeting. We're going to talk more about that, George. But how's it being seen? How's it being reported? How's it being briefed in Washington, D.C. as to what the president wants from this visit?
Well, the issue is that it's been overshadowed, of course, by the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which has dominated politics in America and continues to do so. And one feels is rather going to, overshadow almost a bit of this trip, because bear in mind, Trump is going to Kirk's memorial service at the end of the week. So he's coming to the UK for a couple of days. He's getting his royal treatment. I think for most Americans, they kind of regard the kind of royal family as the curiosity and the kind of that's what Trump really wants out of this trip. The pedigree of being seen at Windsor Castle and all the pomp and ceremony. But there is this kind of Kirk date at the end of the week, which is kind of where all the politics at the moment is kind of gearing towards.
So with that in mind, George, I want to bring Kitty and Joe in a second, but with that in mind, is there any expectation that Donald Trump will be arriving here with his take on freedom of speech very much on his mind, because it's so much a part of the conversation in America now, and that intruding into this visit to the United Kingdom? Yep. Because if that then strays into the area, J.D. Vance territory of reading Britain a lecture on freedom of speech and its failure to support freedom of speech, it gets very awkward, George, doesn't it?
Yeah, it would do. But I have to say that Trump himself is always careful to kind of pay deference to his hosts. And, he came to Scotland only a few weeks ago, and he doesn't want to embarrass Starmer publicly. Actually, he manages to get on with him quite well, it has to be said. It usually tends to be the outriders of the administration, like you say, J.D. Vance, and he's actually not coming on the trip. So that makes it a bit easier for British officials, but obviously they've been hampered a little bit by the fact that Lord Mandelson has had to resign, who was kind of obviously overseeing most of the details of the visit.
Yes.
Just as it was about to happen.
Yes.
I was thinking about this today because they're doing a press conference at Chequers on Thursday, to which I'm going, and whereas in Scotland, as George mentioned, Trump was hosting it because it was at his clubhouse at his golf course. And it went on for hours, didn't it? Do you remember? Everyone was like, oh my goodness, more. But this time, the Brits are hosting it. So I imagine the questions, if we go, two each side, two for the Americans, two for the Brits, that will be the most they want to do. But I can't imagine anyone not asking about it. So Trump will be invited to talk about free speech and talk about Lord Mandelson. Yeah. We saw reports that Trump was upset with Keir Starmer for not letting him know personally that he was sacking Lord Mandelson. So I don't, and also in the week that Elon Musk addressed the rally of Tommy Robinson's supporters in London, I just don't see how it doesn't come up, to be honest.
Yeah, and it doesn't take much, George, does it, to provoke Donald Trump into a reaction. The bigger the reaction, then the bigger the splash. And he wants as little a splash as possible. So there's a bit of a dilemma there. And he won't want to upset the king, although by Thursday at Chequers that bit of the trip will be over.
Yeah. So it's definitely very much two segments. One is the sort of pomp, the Windsor Castle, gold brocade and cucumber sandwiches, and then they get into the kind of actual talks about pharmaceuticals trade, steel, nuclear, all the stuff that, and Ukraine, and Starmer has kind of got a shopping list that he wants to talk to Trump about. So it might be, but then if they stand up at the end and they've got the Brits have got a good deal, that might be sort of slightly overshadowed if Trump also says something about free speech in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, our own Kate McCann was saying earlier on, she was picking up the Downing Street plan, and you can see where this is coming from. They want as few questions as possible.
Yeah.
If it's like 2 on either side, 2 from the White House, 2 from the Westminster lobby, then a lot of you guys are going to be heading down to Chequers for no particular benefit.
And isn't the challenge, though, that there's a 3-hour, there's this urgent debate, which means there's 3 hours being dedicated to talk about Lord Mandelson, which means Wednesday's papers will be further write-up and possible other things that maybe come out from how that carries on tomorrow. And so then, isn't the point with Trump that often he's trying to sort of throw everyone off the scent of the thing that they want to concentrate on by throwing something else in? So is it even potentially possible that to sort of not talk about the Epstein files and the whole connection with Mandelson, which he doesn't want to get to? We know that there's been this effort to sort of not go there in America. Is there then almost the temptation to throw some other sort of grenade or big distraction into the trip that he's got with the UK?
That's a really good point,
George.
It's possible, but you can't underplay how fondly he thinks about the UK, because his mum is Scottish. His mum was a big royalist, and for him it's personal as much as anything. So you've seen. So it was only a couple of weeks ago, Nigel Farage came over here and he was appearing on the Hill. Then he went and met Trump, and he was talking about the case of Lucy Connolly and Graham Linehan. And Farage was kind of, he described Britain as a North Korea. He was kind of painting this dystopian picture of what it was like because of free speech. And yet Trump, he's never really taken up on that line of argument so far. And he can say anything at any time. But I think it's more likely if he's going to complain about something, it's probably going to be about the view of windmills from his golf course, which is a kind of perennial problem.
But George, also, we're all talking. We've been talking even today about, the potential of what Keir Starmer's going to do, how long Keir Starmer's got. It's not as if the US president is immune to the fact that there is massive disquiet. And at some point, when does he decide to sort of distance himself or pick a fight or perhaps not play as well or as friendly? Because it's fine when the leader's doing a good job and you feel like you want to be in their reflective glory or whatever, but when you start to worry if that one is a sort of wounded animal maybe on their way out, is there some value for Trump in sort of some form of distance, no matter how nicely he might have intended to play previously?
Well, part of the reason why Starmer and Trump have got on so well so far is because Trump respects him as a winner, because of the size of Labour's majority at the election. And Trump, he's a sucker for someone who's politically successful. And as now we have, Starmer suffering politically, Reform ahead in the polls consistently, at what point does it change? To be honest, I'm not sure that American politicians follow it so closely. Trump in particular, maybe J.D. Vance or others, certainly they kind of engaged in the kind of minutiae of the debate. But I think for Trump, it's probably just the headline moments of elections, and he saw Starmer with this thumping majority. At what point as Starmer's kind of popularity wanes, does that affect their relationship? I mean, you could see there being a tipping point at some stage.
Yeah, interesting point. George Grills, it's great to have you with us. If you can stay with us, that'd be absolutely great. George, here in the studio, I've got Kitty Donaldson from the I and Joe Tanner. I'm John Pienaar. This is Times Radio with Barclays Corporate Banking. Change your perspective with big picture banking from Barclays.
Get the day's politics.
Joe Tanner, we've got Kitty Donaldson from the Eye, and George Grills is with us momentarily from the Times in Washington, based in Washington. George, we've been watching. Just want to get your thought on the latest on, well, the aftermath of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We saw that story, a huge story, unfold. We saw, well, arguments for it to be a moment of people turning their face away from political violence. Then we saw that develop into pretty quickly into Donald Trump using the thing as part of his political ammunition against the liberals. He blamed the liberal fanatics for American violence, and that developed into some of those around Trump, like his son Don Jr., saying that there was no such thing as right-wing violence. It was all coming from the left, and that was a reaction. It's got very political, maybe not unpredictably, George, but very political very quickly.
Yeah, I think the thoughts are that this murder, I mean, the fury is going to be used to kind of fuel some sort of law and order crackdown. And you've seen, for example, Laura Loomer, who's she's not part of the administration, but she's one of the outriders. She's a kind of conspiracy theorist and supporter of Trump. Anyway, she's urged him to become a dictator in the aftermath of this Charlie Kirk murder and said, we need to kind of suppress all dissent from the left. So you can see the kind of rhetoric is really amped up. And, I think part of it is the way in which social media fanned the flames of the kind of footage, that got shared straight away. It's very graphic of his murder. And it was shocking. And it's just played already into a very partisan and divided political climate over here and just kind of ramped it up again.
Yeah, it is. Oh, goodness me, we know a bit about polarisation in politics and arguments, debate turning into rows, on an ugly level, but mercifully still way behind that, Kitty.
Yeah, and actually it's in times like that when the President of the United States stands up and makes basically a statement that's prejudicial to the trial of the suspect in this, that I sort of said, well, thank God for someone like Keir Starmer, who would not do, whose lawyerly background would mean there's no way he'd do that, and actually would take would seek to calm down and has sought to calm down any sort of copycat violence and reaction. So I think, we are lucky to be living in Britain, not the US, I think, right now.
And George, we've also seen, haven't we, the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, sort of, as it were, putting on social media almost a sort of running commentary of the investigation, telling the world, anyone who cares to look at his social media profile, what's going on with the investigation into the assassination, the friend, associate, flatmate, whatever it was of the suspect being transgender. That was the substance of the FBI director's tweet to the world. I mean, again, extraordinary is an overused word, George, but it's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, and I've been in Utah. I've only just got back from Utah. I was in Utah over the weekend at the end of last week, and I must say, you see how it's reported on social media, and then you go on the ground, and there are obviously very unique circumstances to this case. So the chief suspect comes from a Mormon background, which obviously is quite a conservative religious group, and how that would affect if he was perhaps in a relationship with someone who was transgender, how that would kind of play out, the tensions with his family and his church perhaps, but also the amount of guns in Utah is astonishing. Some of the first people we went and interviewed afterwards around the back of the university campus where they were kind of originally looking for the suspects. One of the first people we spoke to, he said, "Do you have guns?" He said, "Yeah, I've got one on me right now." He lifted up his shirt and he had a concealed carry pistol tucked into his waistband. So guns are readily available, and that is it's not surprising that you end up with all these moments of political violence in the US.
All right, George, I'll let you go. I know you're on a really tight schedule. George Grills there of the Times in Washington. Thank you, George. As always, let's talk again soon. So here with me, we've got Joe Tanner. I've got Kitty Donaldson still here with me. I mean, I'm gonna look ahead to the story, the big story tomorrow. We got the debate in the Commons, which is the rumbling on and on of the Mandelson story. But meanwhile, Donald Trump, it's a big deal. He's coming here. Given our Prime Minister is under the kind of pressure that he's under, what's the best that he can hope for, guys, from this visit, do you reckon?
Getting out unscathed. I think it's a tough one because I take on board the things that George said, but I think we have to remember that Trump is unpredictable. You could have a perfectly good event and then he could get himself online later in the evening, could say something, the way that we've seen things derailed previously. And for Starmer at the moment to be stood with somebody who is a figure that is still very controversial. It's, he's got a divided party, he's got a deputy leadership election going on. The idea then that he's going to be stood and having to sort of potentially even bite his tongue at a particular given moment if Trump does do something that is problematic could be a really, really difficult moment for Starmer. So I think it's I always think with these things it's you kind of want these events, but at the same time you sort of want to get away with it. You want to sort of get through. You almost want it to be over as soon as it starts. It's like having an awkward family member come to stay for the weekend, and you just want to sort of get through it without there being a huge row, some form of embarrassment for either side. And if for example you were hoping to make sure you were still in the will at the end of the visit, that you've not done anything to upset that, or which is sort of the equivalent of your trade deals or your tariff situation would be the sort of I suppose the sort of the equivalent if you take it out of a family setting.
Yes, and there are some substantive things that Keir Starmer will be hoping for. Some sort of movement on steel production, tariffs. That would be ideal. I mean, that's got a very real knock-on effect to jobs and security. Whether or not the Brits will cave on a tax on online big tech firms, that's another interesting thing I'll be looking out for. Whether the NHS should pay more for pharmaceuticals. I mean, all these things have real world effects and will be poured over towards the end of the week.
And I mean, as you say, that's going to be a big part of the Prime Minister's agenda. If he makes progress on those things, and it's possible that he might. We're not talking about, as Max Hastings was saying earlier on, we're not talking about getting a good deal, just a less bad deal.
Yeah, exactly.
Because in some ways we're a step or two behind the European Union in their deals on some of these products. But assuming, let's just say that's possible, because it is possible. Does that cut much ice with the British public at this point? Maybe it ought to, but do you think it does?
I'm still not convinced that the public really understand half of what's going on and why it's going on. Even when you think about tariffs, the idea that there was a number set on the amount of cars, for example, that you could export, but actually people think, well, why isn't it all cars? Why does it have to be a set number? And some of this stuff is so sort of big and unwieldy that it just doesn't mean anything to Joe public and how they see their lives affected or not affected by these big conversations. And I think the big challenge for Starmer is that he is seen as having done a much better job on the international stage. So it's kind of like, don't screw it up. Don't invite this guy here and then cause a bigger problem for ourselves when actually you've sort of got away with it so far. You've been doing all right. You've managed to go to the Oval Office. You've come away without upsetting anybody. We seem to have got a slightly less worse setup than everybody else. But then there's also it's not just about the public. It's, the rest of Europe will be watching. You've got the Ukraine. Coalition of the willing. Yep. It's like at any given moment, are you going to sort of show a bit too much leg or not enough leg? Or are you going to say something that gives away maybe another conversation that's been going on? And Starmer's pretty adept at this stuff. He's taken to the sort of diplomacy bit pretty well. But I just think the stakes are really high. And also there ultimately is a bit of frustration from the public. The public were not out marching at the weekend saying we want you to do a better deal with the US. They're complaining about their lives here.
Yeah, they're not painting that on a roundabout, are they?
No, they're complaining about what is happening to the UK and their prospects, their fortunes. They don't see that as directly related to Trump. So it's a big challenge as to how you make people feel better.
I absolutely agree, and I think the whole thing has the possibility of going badly wrong, but probably in ways that we won't necessarily see right now.
Okay, it's a certain kind of cliffhanger.
Dan.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks so much, guys. Let's talk again very, very soon. Our producer was Emily Leahy, technical operator Isaac Marley. I'm going to be back tomorrow. Right now, after the news, Kate Borsay here on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the times.
Thanks, John. Have a great night. It is Kate Borsett. It's the evening edition on Times Radio. Hello, welcome along. Coming up,
the nature and extent of the relationship that Peter Mandelson had with Epstein was far different to what I had understood to be the position when I appointed him.
Keir Starmer has spoken publicly for the first time about the sacking of Peter Mandelson. With mounting pressure and questions over a leadership challenge, we'll speak to a Labour MP about the state of the party. Meanwhile, we'll also chat to the former Conservative Party chair, Jake Berry, who left to join Reform. We'll ask him what he makes of Shadow Minister Danny Kruger's decision to do the same. Plus, after call